Can join.
All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN Daf Tzadik Tes. We are mamish heading towards the end of the Masechta. In today's daf, we're going to be learning many different halachas, most of which are connected to the malacha of Hoitza'ah, as we explained when we began Perek HaMoitzi Tefillin, like Tosfos points out, that really the bulk of the Perek is about the malacha of Hoitza'ah. We're going to be reviewing and further clarifying the last Mishnah that we learned on Daf Tzadik Ches Amud Beis, when a person is standing in the Reshus HaYachid and urinating into the Reshus HaRabbim, or if a person is standing in the Reshus HaYachid and they're spitting in the Reshus HaRabbim, then they're mamish chayev chatos. We're going to learn about the concept of machshavtoi mashva makoim, that one's intent makes a location significant. We actually mentioned this in yesterday's shiur. We learned in Shabbos, in the beginning, Daf Ches, that a akira and a hanocha is only viewed as such if you were oiker something from a daled by daled tfachim area, and or when you placed it down, you placed it on a daled by daled area. And one of the exceptions that we'll learn today is that if you are placing it in a particular place and you benefit by it being dafka there, that machshava gives that place the chashivus of daled by daled. Sai bein la'akira ubein lahanocha. We're going to further clarify the shita of Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah. And in our Mishnah said that if you have saliva gathered in your mouth, then you already may not walk daled amas b'reshus harabim, and that's going to be mamish the malacha of Hoitza'ah. We're going to ultimately see that Rabbi Yehuda at a later point changed his opinion and he became more lenient. He adds another fundamental detail that is only true if you swirl it around in your mouth. Then it's considered completely detached, and therefore you may not carry. If it wasn't swirled around in your mouth, which is something that our Mishnah does not mention, then he'll hold at the end. He holds like the Tanach, you are not violating anything, not midoraisa nor midrabanan. We're going to get off a little bit into the laws of Trumas u'Maisros, remembering that before a product is considered finished, finalized, readied, then midoraisa, you're not mechuyev to tithe it, and you can partake of it. Midrabanan, you can partake of it only by achilas arai, eating it casually, but not achilas keva, but not having a proper formal meal. And we're going to have some of that applied to wine in a wine press, which lokula alma, before it's gathered later, at a later stage, it's not considered the finished product, which means midoraisa, you can drink wine directly out of a wine press. But again, midrabanan, you only may do so if your drinking is going to be classified as a casual type of drinking, and we'll see how, what, when, and where does that happen. We're going to also learn about in the times of Chazal, there were two different types of systems, similar to now, how they got the water off their roofs onto the street. Roofs, b'chlal, were flat, as Rashi says, in the times of Chazal. So they would either have some sort of drain pipe or some sort of gutter. And again, if we'll have pictures that will be helpful, then we'll put them up on the screen. And we're going to see, is one allowed to collect water when you're standing in the Reshus HaRabbim from a drain pipe, collecting water from a gutter, from a maschila? We're going to learn the difference between you collecting it, it's from the ear, that's called koilate. That means the water already left these pipes, and while it's in the ear, collecting it is one din, versus what's called mitzadef, or mitzaref, which would mean pressing your mouth or your keli into the mouth of this drain pipe, into the mouth of this gutter, that might be more problematic, as we'll learn. We're going to learn yet another Mishnah on Daf Tzadik Tes Amud Beis about a person who wants to draw water out of a water pit. The water pit is in the Reshus HaRabbim. You are in your house, in your window, on your second floor, you can simply lower the bucket. So we're going to learn about a water pit that has an embankment around it. If the water pit is rendered into a Reshus HaYachid, then yes, you can take water from your house, means you are in a Reshus HaYachid, from the water pit, which is also called a Reshus HaYachid, Reshus HaYachid, Reshus HaYachid, or Svika, especially if it's a water pit. Here, not even midrabanan do you need to have an eruv, because there's no one living in this other location. God willing, if we'll have enough time, we're going to learn the final Mishnah on Daf Tzadik Tes Amud Beis, that is going to teach us two fundamental laws regarding pertaining a tree on Shabbos. We're going to learn again about the concept of dira shetashmish ala avir. If you have a place that's properly enclosed, it was enclosed to live in it. But the function of people in there is not to live in there, but for them to be a shomer for what's happening out there in the field, how that will affect and how that will limit the status of the Reshus HaYachid that happens in this enclosed area and much more. So Chavra Daf Tzadik Tes Amud Aleph, top of the Amud, second line by the two dots. The Gemara is referring back to the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah began speaking about how one is allowed to stand in the Reshus HaYachid and to be metaltal an object in the Reshus HaRabim. That was mamish the opening line of the Mishnah according to our version. Then 2 lines later, the Mishnah went back to this, and the Mishnah gave a limitation. That when are you allowed to stand in the Reshus HaYachid and be metaltal in the Reshus HaRabim ubilvad? That's where we're up to. Shelo yoytzi michutz. Then the words are daladamas. I get it. That just because, in other words, this Mishnah follows the opinion that we're not chayshin on that you're going to bring the article to your domain. If you would be chayish to that, then you would not be allowed to move anything. But we're not chayish to that. Nevertheless, you can't move it more than daladamas in the Reshus HaRabim. Now, what happens if you did end up moving it more than daladamas with Reshus HaRabim? So the Gemara begins by making the following inference that ha-hoitzi, you're standing in the Reshus HaYachid, your hand is in the Reshus HaRabim, you moved something, then you'll be chayav chatos. Now let me ask you a question, Chavra. When we say you're standing in the Reshus HaYachid, what picture do you have in your mind? So if you'll remember, the hemshech of the Mishnah is including the Mishnah Daf Tzadik Zayin Amud Beis, when we spoke about the iskufa, and we spoke about someone that's on the gag. So it should also include someone that's standing on a roof. That's very significant over here. Because oy bazoi, lema, l'chora, from the inference that our Mishnah will be a siyua misayeh leila rava. The Omar Rava, we just quoted this yesterday. We're learning it the way Rashi teaches the statement. Hamaver chayfetz mitchilas arba l'soif arba. If a person is in the Reshus HaRabim and they're moving an object, and they're moving it to daladamis, even if ve'eviru derech olav, the way Rashi teaches, that the person lifted it above 10 tvachim, that means that it went through a makim ptur. Rava holds, not only is it forbidden, but it remains forbidden biblically or chayev, because all we care about is where did the akira happen and where did the hanocha happen. And in our case, it happened in Reshus HaRabim, but it was beyond the daladamis. So here also, since like we mentioned, in the hemshech of the Mishnayos, we are also speaking about a person standing on his gag. And if I'm going to be on my gag and I'm going to move something in the Reshus HaRabim more than daladamis, certainly because I'm on the gag, which is at least 10 tvachim above the ground, I'm going to be lifting it above 10 tvachim. I'm going to be lifting it above 10 tvachim. This is mamash what the Rav is saying. And we are inferring from the Mishnah that Yechayev Chatos is Araya. Counters the Gemara, no, you can't bring a proof. Mik Tani Im Hoitzi Chayev Chatos. All the Mishnah says is that you should not be Yoitzi Chutz. But if you did it, maybe Im Hoitzi Pater Avalasa. I'm speaking about in the case where you were standing above Dalid, above 10 Tvachim. Maybe we won't agree to that. Other people say that it was mamash the opposite. They learned the Mishnah, and the inference from the Mishnah was Im Hoitzi Pater. And if that is the inference, then our Mishnah is a tiyuf to the Rava, because Rava says Amaver mitchilas dalid l'seif dalid in the Reshus HaRabim. If the heviroi derech olav, if you lifted it above 10 tfachim, the Reshus HaRabim doesn't go beyond 10 tfachim. Rava holds Yechayev. Our Mishnah implies that you potted. So here we answer no. Miktani hoitzi im hoitzi potted patel avalasid. Dilma im hoitzi chayiv chatos. Bekitzer, our Mishnah is not a raya, nor is it a tiyufta. Baruch atah dino Eloheinu Eloheinu shakanu ledvarim. Next case in that Mishnah was urinating. These are all practical occurrences, especially in the times of Chazal. Maybe they had an outhouse if they were lucky, but for urinating, people stood, one door, they urinated out there. And urinate in the Reshus HaRabim, there's no machloikus about it. Omar Rav Yosef, if, and the Mishnah also spoke about spitting, again, there was no machloikus about that either, that if a person was mashten, hishten, Or the second case in the Mishnah was virak, a person spit it out, then the chayav chatos. Now we got a problem. Again, the Mishnah doesn't say that explicitly. It just says what not to do. But if we are indeed inferring that you're chayav chatos, did we not learn this rule that what? Akira v'hanacha mi'al gabe makim daled v'leke, because your bladder doesn't have dalet tfachim, at least let's hope not. A person's mouth doesn't have dalet kama, one tefach doesn't have dalet tfachim. So the kasha is not on where it landed. It's not about the hanacha, but it's about the akira. So answers the Gemara. Guys, we had these concepts already in Shabbos, that machshavtoi mashva lei makim, that one's intent makes the area significant, meaning over here, since it's required, there's no other option. Urine has to leave the bladder. Saliva has to leave the mouth. In other words, whenever we apply this both to the akira and the hanacha, whether the akira or the hanacha is coming from a particular place, that's the nakuda. It has to come from there. If it has to come from there, or it has to land on there, or you want it to land on there, then we consider that location as if it is dalid al dalid tfachim, and therefore yechayev midoraisa. A person threw an article, the nach befi hakelev, right? And that was the goal. The goal was, I'm feeding the dog. So it landed in the mouth of the dog. Means I made an akira. The hanacha was in the mouth of a dog, is also not 4 tfachim. Or if a person on Yom Tiv, if a person wanted something to be burnt, I know there's another issue here of consuming it. You want to add the fuel to the fire, but you wanted the log to fall in the mouth of the furnace, of the fireplace. We're speaking about the opening of a fireplace. It's also not dalad by dalad. And Rava says, Yechayv chatos, here also. The answer is, Elo, when you're feeding your dog, you want, for whatever you are throwing, to land in the dog's mouth. If you are fueling a fire, you want it dafka to land in the fichivshan. You don't want it to land on the ground. In other words, whenever it requires the location, either where it leaves or where it lands, that makes that area chashuv.
And Rabbi, your hand or your body, whatever, with that automatically is not. We're not asking about that. That's considered.
Very good. So in Shabbos we spoke about the hand. So the Gemara didn't even use those words. The Gemara said, "B'negei a hand," that a hand is automatically chashuv. But a hand, you can't compare a hand to the bladder. That's why whatever we said in Shabbos won't go to the bladder. Here we have to add this nekuda of machshavtei mashrei makim. Hachinami. So just like over there by pi kivshan machshavtei mashrei makim. Hachinami machshava mashrei makim. Beautiful. Now, Baye Rava, you mamish see that we're going into all these little details at the end of the Masechta. What happens if the person is b'reshus hayachid, but you're mamish by the edge of the reshus hayachid, upi ama, the tip of one's male organ, out of which goes out the urine, is already in the reshus harabim, but the body, including the bladder, is in the reshus hayachid, and the person urinates. The urine lands in the reshus harabim. So asks Rava, inquires Rava, do we say Ma'u basad akira azlinan? The akira is the bladder. It became dislocated in the reshus hayachid, but it's concealed. It's not visible. Didn't leave your body yet. Or we say that the akira happens not when the urine leaves the bladder, but when it exits the body. And here in our case, it exited the body already in the reshus harabim. Right? We're speaking about where the urine did not land 4 amas away. The urine landed near the person. And if that would have been the case, then nothing happened. So are you chayiv or not? On that we say, Yavaldik, Teiku. Basar akira, basar yitzira, basar yitzira. Okay. Then the Mishnah went on about spit, about saliva. And Rabbi Yehuda is very machmir, right? So the Tanach spoke about spitting. Spitting, we get it. It's in your mouth. If you spit it out, okay, now it exited. But so if you're under the reshus hayachid and you spit into the reshus harabim, you're chayav chatos. Says Rabbi Yehuda, v'chein lo yarik. Rabbi Yehuda, and more than that. Like let's read the words. Af mishenitlash rukai defiv. right? If saliva collects in one's mouth and you walk out with it, then you're chayiv chatos. You're chayiv chatos. You're violating Isur Dorais of carrying. Even though you did not swirl it in your mouth. Now, I know none of that was mentioned over here, but we're going to quote a Mishnah in Kalim, where we will see Rabbi Yehuda quoting that as another precondition. Only after you swirl something, you move it around in your mouth, only then is the saliva considered detached and no longer part of your body. Why did we have that in Kalim? Because they were learning about Hilchas Tumah and Tara. One of the foundational rules of Tumah and Tara is that articles, we're speaking about articles that grow produce, even after it's detached off the ground, can only acquire Tumah if first it became susceptible to becoming Tumah. It has to become Mukhshir L'Kabel Tumah, and that happens if any one of the 7 liquids wet it with the willingness, with the contentment of its owner, with all those details. One of the 7 liquids are water. Saliva at a certain point is considered water. Question is from which point? Certainly when saliva leaves the body, it's considered mayim. What about saliva in the mouth? Lamay nafkamina. So that's the case in the Mishnah. You have a kohen. He's eating truma. Devela is eating a cake of figs, and biyodayim misu'avos, while his hands are a sheni. Whoa, how can he eat? Truma becomes a shlishi because those figs that he's eating never became wet. So even though his hands are a sheni, he can eat the truma. So he put the food in his mouth. But then as he's chewing these figs, just as an example, he bit on a little pebble. There's some impurity mixed in the figs, and he wants to remove it. And what did he do? And he put his hand in his mouth to take out the pebble. Now, at this point, he chewed enough figs where there is saliva in his mouth. Wow. So Rav Meir says, across the board, metame, because saliva in the mouth, the amount of saliva that forms in the mouth while you are eating is significant. It's already considered mayim. So this partially chewed devela is now mukhshar l'kabel tumah. Your hands, midrabanan are shniyos l'tumah, which can render truma into a shlishi, passes the truma. Really, metame means pas. However, Rabbi Yossi holds as a rule, mitar, because saliva in the mouth is not detached ever. If you spit it out, yeah, but not when it's in the mouth. And Rabbi Yehuda, Omer, it depends. If you swirl the saliva in your mouth, then it's considered detached, and then it's machshir, the dvelam, and therefore tamei or pasul, like the lashon there is tamei. But if you did not swirl it, then you're tahar. Now this is a qualification that's not mentioned over here. So how do you reconcile shitas Rabbi Yehuda? Answers the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, muchlefes hashita. It's good to learn a lot. Normally, what does muchlefes hashita mean? It means that when you have 2 statements of Tanoim, we flip it. What one said, the other one said. Here doesn't mean that. Muchlefes hashita means that Rabbi Yehuda changed his mind. Rabbi Yehuda changed his own mind. Which Rabbi Yehuda changed? Our Mishnah changed. The one that we just quoted in Kalim, that's his, so to say, Mishnah Achrona. That's his final statement. After he said his opinion in Kalim, now we have to go back here to ERUVIN, and we have to change what he writes over here. So if you have nitlash, if it's just nitlash, you're not going to be chayiv anything. But if you have saliva that gathered in your mouth and you swirled it around with your tongue, with your mouth, only here does Rabbi Yehuda say, may you not walk out. Now that's a chiddush. Rish Lakish tries to disagree with that, and he says, how often do we have that? But we have that, but he does it not over here. There in Kalim, we're speaking about saliva. Saliva is more bottled to the body. When is it considered detached? Only when you swirl it. Only when you swirl saliva. Over here, even though the Mishnah uses the word zuraik, which means saliva, it doesn't mean only saliva, but it's here we're speaking dafka about kichoy. Kichoy is phlegm. Phlegm is already less part of the body. It's easier halachically to detach the phlegm in your mouth from your body than roik, then spittle, then saliva.
So what do you do with the phlegm? You have to either,
you have to spit it out.
but spit it less than dalaramas, because then if you spit it far, then it would go.
Very good. So two things, Danny. The Mishnah began speaking about Rishus HaYachid and Rishus HaRabim. So if a person is about to leave his house from a Rishus HaYachid into a Rishus HaRabim, if there's phlegm in his mouth, get rid of it. And like you said, and also if you're walking bid Rishus HaRabim and you realize there's phlegm in your mouth, don't walk daladamas. Spit it out right in front of you. Very good. But the Gemara, hold on. V'hatanya. Now to make this question not so clear that we know the answer, the Dikdukei Seifrim has another version in what we're quoting. V'hatanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer kichai viroikai. That's the gersa we're going to learn. They're both the same. You're telling me Reish Lakish that there's a difference. Here it's being put together, and my love, roik the niklash is also like kichai, that only the nitlash renders it disconnected from your body, which will again appear a lot more chamur than the shita that Rabbi Yehuda says in Masechtas Kelim. So the Gemara says no. The Braisa means only by kichai is the nitlash enough to render it mashke, or over here for Hilchas Shabbos, only kichai is the nitlash enough for you to say it's something separate from your body. Therefore, don't walk out. But by roik, it also has to have heipachba. Very good.
Rabbi, theoretically, according to the whatever our theory that it doesn't have to be gathered in the mouth. That means anytime you have any saliva in your mouth.
Danny, gathered, Lakula alman has to be gathered. If it's not gathered, then the zikr nothing.
But what does mean gathered? We all have saliva in our mouth all the time.
No, gathered means, okay, I don't know. These are Mishnahs. They don't put these types of detailed measurements. Gathered means that it's not the saliva that you have in your mouth right now.
So you have like a larger amount or something.
Let's go. There's such a large amount that if you want to, you can swirl it around your mouth. But our Mishnah doesn't mention that you also have to swirl it. Now again, how do you put the limit to that? All shiurim by the Tanoim are this way. Okay. I clearly Vatanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer kichoi shenitlash v'chein roikoi shenitlash lo yahalach dalad amas atshi yorik. Clearly you see not only by kichoi, but even by spittle, if it's gathered, even if you did not swirl it, Rabbi Yehuda holds it's already considered detached. And because of this, the Gemara goes back to the answer of Rabbi Yechanan. That used to be shitas Rabbi Yechanan. At a certain point later in Rabbi Yehuda,
not Rabbi Yechanan.
Rabbi Yehuda's life, Rabbi Yechanan gave that statement that Rabbi Yehuda later in his life changed his opinion. He became more lenient, and that's going to affect not only Hechsher Tumah but also Hilchas Shabbos. That if you were not Heipach, that goes to phlegm now as well, altogether. There's no difference. If you don't swirl it around your mouth, it's not considered detached, it's not considered liquid, and you're not going to be chayiv for carrying. Omer Reish Lakish, when we're speaking about phlegm, that kiyach b'fnei rabbi, if a person, right, coughs up and out phlegm in the presence of his teacher, in front of his teacher, he's chayiv misa. Wow, shenemar, a pasuk in Mishlei, call. Wow, speaking about phlegm, here we go. All who hate me, meaning Torah, love death, that's the pshat. The Gemara, don't say whoever hates me loves death. Those who cause others to hate me. When a Yid, who others identify as a Torah observant Yid, behave in a way that when someone looks at them, they are repulsed, and therefore they are repulsed from what this person represents. One who causes others to hate Torah, they love death. What does that refer to? That refers to someone who spits out phlegm in front of his teacher. That's disgusting. So the Gemara asks, what should he do? If phlegm comes up in his mouth, what do you expect him to do? So the Gemara says, yeah, it's not about you having phlegm. It's not, that's that you're an oinus. What do you do with that? It's like the Alter Rebbe says, the machshava zara goes into your head by your beinoni, that's not your fault. What do you do with it? By the phlegm, you're not supposed to spit it out in front of your Rebbe. That is where you're doing something that's disgusting. So the Gemara answers, Kiach v'rak, which is disgusting coming in. And so what should you do? Says Rashi, two things. Either spit it to the side, cover your mouth, turn around, or Rashi says, you should have lahavliyah b'chsusay. When I grew up, all of the elders, the Kenim, they had a handkerchief. It was a kanes. All of the phlegm for 30 years went in the same handkerchief. Remember that? They had a handkerchief, and they spit it in there, and then they used to put it around their necks. I could never understood that. And then 20 minutes later, they're the same. Amazing. We have tissue napkins. They didn't have the disposables. That's good. That's not disgusting. Disgusting is spitting out the phlegm with not an exus. All right. Good. Says the Mishnah. We're going to learn so many. Now, this Mishnah is still a hemshech. Says the Mishnah, Lo yamid adam b'reshus hayachid v'yishta b'reshus harabim. Here it's similar, but not the same. A person is in the reshus hayachid. We're speaking about a person who's drinking into the reshus harabim, and what's the fear? We're speaking about someone who's using a keli. You know what the fear is? The fear is that if you are in, your mouth is into the reshus harabim, if all you need is to take one little move back and you are back in the reshus hayachid, so then we're afraid that you're gonna move back into your domain, and then you're gonna end up carrying from reshus harabim into the reshus hayachid. Same thing, if you are in the reshus harabim and there is water in the reshus hayachid, which will be typical, because if the water is in a water pit that has 10 tefachim depth and 4x4, then you have then the water is in the reshus hayachid. So can you lean over it and drink? So we begin by saying you can't do that, because with a very small movement, you're going to lean back and you're going to go back into your reshus harabim, and then you're going to be carrying from reshus hayachid into reshus harabim. However, says the Mishnah, Elim Kain, however, when could you, if you make an effort of putting your entire head and the majority of your body, that means that you're leaning your waist over that other location, that is going to remind you, whoa, that for Shabbos, you got to stay there until you finish drinking. Then you are allowed, even though your feet are in one domain, if Roishoy Verubai is already in the domain of the Mayim, then you can drink. And like Rashi makes it clear, it's about you're drinking with a cup, with a keli. We are afraid that you're going to move back and carry the keli, and this will be your reminder. And now the Mishnah ends with words that have to be clarified, B'chein, Bigas, and the same is in a wine press. Now, what are we talking about? If it's time drinking wine in a wine press or over a wine press, when you are standing in the reshus harabim, if that will be the pshat in the Mishnah, then why did the Mishnah have to give B'chein, Bigas? What did we add? We added nothing. Whether you're drinking water or wine, if the fear is that you're going to take the kois or the keli and you're going to move it back, and therefore you have to be roishay v'rubai over, then there's no novelty here. So we'll see in the Gemara a whole new understanding of the words B'chein Bigas. Okay, before we get there, asks the Gemara, Reisha refers to Daf Tzadik Ches. What are we referring to in Daf Tzadik Ches? Daf Tzadik Zayin Amid Beis. That whether Oimed Daf Tzadik, right away Daf Tzadik Ches Amid Beis. That Oimed Adam B'Reshus HaYachid U'Mataltel B'Reshus HaRabim. Guys, we're not learning the Mishnah the way we finished yesterday's share as Rab Chinana Bar Shalemiah, right, taught it to Rav Sanchia. We're not amending it into Rabbi Meir, where it says, Lo Yamid. No, the way we have it. And we already quoted yesterday that on Daf Kuf Aleph, there's Taka Machloikis about it. So the Mishnah on Daf Tzadik Ches Amid Beis, that says, Oimid Adam B'Reshus HaYachid U'Mataltel B'Reshus HaRabim. That's following the Rabbanan. And our Mishnah asks the Gemara L'churas following Rabbi Meir, because we're equating it. We're saying that who would hold that you can't drink from another domain? Why not? This whole chashash of maybe you're going to accidentally do an act of hoitzah, that chashash l'cha'ira is only Rabbi Meir. According to the Rabbanan, if I can stand in the Reshus HaYachid and move something in the Reshus HaRabim, then why can't I stand in the Reshus HaYachid and drink from the Reshus HaRabim even without Roishay V'Rubai? So the Gemara says, no, you can't compare our Mishnah and the Mishnah prior. The Mishnah prior, whatever you are moving, you don't necessarily need. When you drink water, you need the water. There's a much greater chashash that you might move back into your domain. Amar Rabbi Yosef, that our Mishnah is b'chafetzim shetzrichim loy. You need, the object here is the water. You need what you're moving. And whenever you have a need to it, here, like Rashi says, the first Rashi under the Gemara, feel Rabbanan Moida the Gazer Behu. The Metoich Shehut Tzarech Lahem, so maybe accidentally Yachnisem Etzloi. And therefore, Mashken Halol Tzrichem Loi, right? You need the Mashke, the Gazrinon, unless you are Reish of the Rubai over the water. Very good. Now, our Mishnah spoke about the Rishus HaYachid and Rishus HaRabim. Here we make a Gzeira, which is a typical Gzeira, that you might end up violating an Isur D'Oraisa. Asks the Gemara, what happens? Karmel Ismai. What happens if you are, let's say, B'Rishus HaYachid, the water is a Karmelis, even if you will accidentally move back? What's the worst case scenario? You only violated an Isur D'Rabbanan. Normally, this is where we say that we don't make a Gzeira L'Gzeira. So do we make this decree? So Abaya says, yes, we do. He. Now, of course, Abaya generally subscribes to the concept that we're not goizer or Gzeira L'Gzeira. But let's understand something. When the Chazal said that a carmelis, but you may not carry from a carmelis to a Rishus HaYachid. Why did they say that a carmelis is not a Rishus HaRabim? Because a carmelis has the appearance of a Rishus HaRabim. And they were afraid that if you will carry from a carmelis to a Rishus HaYachid, people erroneously will carry from a Rishus HaRabim to a Rishus HaYachid. So when they made that Gezerah, it automatically included this din as well. In other words, since you're not allowed to stand in the Rishus HaYachid and drink from the Rishus HaRabim, when your mouth is in the Rishus HaRabim, you're not allowed to do that if it's not Reish V'Rubai. So when they said that a carmelis is like a Rishus HaRabim, it's like one long extended Gezerah. He, awesome. Amarava says, no, he, meaning a carmelis, not carrying from a carmelis to a Rishus HaYachid is in itself only a D'Rabbanan, a Gzeira. Is va'anan neikoim v'nigzak Gzeira l'Gzeira? No, our Mishnah is dafke if the two domains are two biblical domains. Now, Ravan doesn't need to prove his position because that's the general rule that we don't make a Gzeira L'Gzeira. I know that we can explain that Abaya, like we just said, he considers this just to be an extension of the original Gzeira. It's like one long Gzeira, but you have to have legs to stand on. So Amar Abaya, I'll tell you how I take my position, because since it says in the last line in our Mishnah, like we said, v'chein begas. Now, hold on. Where exactly is this wine press? Look inside the top of Rashi. If it's just another case, Rishus HaYachid, a gas, if the gas would have been in a proper Rishus HaYachid, and the Mishnah is adding that you're not allowed to stand in the Rishus HaRabim, the Yoshid Savorei Bigas, the Yitol Keli V'Yishta, because there's a Chashinon that you're going to move back right into your Rishus HaRabim. That doesn't make sense, says Abaya. That is exactly the case of the water. Why would the Mishnah have to repeat it? Why would wine be different than water? Elolav, the reason why the Mishnah adds v'chein begas, because we're speaking about a gas that is not an Rishus HaYachid. The gas is in a carmelis. Why would it be a carmelis? He gives an example. Because the wine press itself has mechitzas that are not 10 tfachim. The gas is for sure dalad by dalad, but it's not 10, it's a carmelis. And that's the whole point of the Mishnah, that we don't consider this Gezerah L'Gzeira. Now, Rava has to now explain how he understands v'chein begas, because Abaya Taka has a good point. That why would the Mishnah add v'chein begas if it's just the same? So top line in the Gemara, but the Rava tells you that the last line of the Mishnah has nothing to do with Hilchos Shabbos. It's a whole different topic. It's about L'Inyan Meiser. Meisres. You only are mechuyev to separate Trumas and Meisres, because the produce is tevel only when the product is considered fully processed. Wine in a wine press is not considered fully processed. We learned this so many times. It goes from the wine press into some sort of holding pit, into a boil. When the wine goes into the pit, then it's considered processed. Before that, midoiraisa, you're not mechuyev to be ma'aser, and therefore it's not tevel, and you can drink from it. Came along Chachamim and they said no, that even though it's not yet processed, yes, you could partake of the wine. If it's called achilas arai here, it's going to be called casual drinking. But if you're going to have achilas keva, if you're going to have formal drinking, midrabanan, you may not have it. So now what makes your drinking called formal? What makes your drinking called casual? So that's what the Mishnah is saying. And we're going to go into more details in a moment. That when do we say that if someone is taking the wine directly out of the gas, out of the wine press, do we say, that type of drinking, you're bending over it, that drinking is called arai only if you're roishay verubai over the gas. This is the most uncomfortable position. That renders your drinking into arai, into casual, and only then can you do it, even though you didn't tithe it yet. And the Chen Omar Absheish is that our Mishnah that says the words V'chein begas is not speaking about at all Hilchos Shabbos, but it's speaking about the Le'in Meiser. And now we will see that our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, which will be kind of amazing because this whole sugya began with the Havamina that Sefer Rabbi Meir. The V'chein begas is going to go like Rav Meir, not the Rav Meir that we just quoted. V'negeya ayu chayshish when you are b'Reshus HaYachid, whether you're going to move something in the Reshus HaRabim. The Rav Meir in Hilchos Meisos. We learned the Mishnah the Tanan, Shoysin al gas. Now, in those days, wine was so concentrated that for it to become drinkable, you needed to dilute it with water. Sometimes people would dilute the wine with cold water, and sometimes you diluted it with hot water. So the Tanakama, which is Rav Meir, says, Shoysin al hagas, when you are over the gas, that in itself renders your act of drinking not formal, but yes, casual. Arai, bein bechamin, bein betzoinen, and therefore upater, you're not obligated to tithe it. You are good. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Eliezer is always machayiv. Rabbi Eliezer holds that I know that the product is not considered final until it came into the holding pit. But the moment you added water into the wine, you diluted the wine. Wine is something chashuv. You made it drinkable. Any type of drinking is already called kava by wine. That's Rabbi Eliezer ben Tzaddik. Chachamim say it depends. If you put hot water in it, it's about quantity, like Rashi says. Hot wine is something that if you were to decide to pour it back into the wine press, the heat that you added in your little cup of wine will ruin the rest of it. So you will never pour it back. So it's quantity. So you will drink everything you have in your cup. That amount renders it a keva drinking, and therefore you chayiv because you did not take off Trumas U'Maisos. But if you added cold water, which means that you will be able to pour it back in, you're not sitting down by a table, you're leaning over it. So then we say that you're patur, because a person will be machzer es hamoiser. And as the Rishonim speak out, our Mishnah is following Rav Meir. Bein bechamin, bein betzoinen is okay, but the Mishnah says, why does Rav Meir always consider it a achilas arai? I know it's not achila, we're just using that expression, a casual drinking, because you're roishay verubai over it. No, the more uncomfortable, it makes so much sense you are, the more we're going to say, if you're eating in such an uncomfortable position, you can't say that's a formal way of drinking wine. And therefore, I don't care if it's tzainen. I don't care if you will be able to pour it back in. I don't care if it makes no difference. Let Rav Meir, it's about the position you are in. Okay.
So Rabbi,
Yes.
the temporary drinking, according to Rav Meir, we understand is him standing outside and bent in. But if he's fully in it, like sitting on a chair inside the wine press, that would be not okay according to Rav Meir.
Well, yeah, people don't sit in a wine press. It's about if you're standing more or less upright and only your face is over the press and you're drinking that way, then
that's the way Rav Meir says it's okay.
No. That's what our Mishnah is adding. It has to be roishay verubai. Roishay verubai means that you're really bent over it.
And in such a case, it would be considered achilas arai.
Position makes it arai. That's not called keva.
Okay, so but hot or cold, he doesn't care. If you're standing up, it's no good. If you're bent over, it's okay.
Very good, very good. Okay, guys, if you have a good picture, that will be very helpful. Like we mentioned in the introduction, just to become familiar with the words, there is a maschila. A maschila is a gutter, and there's a tziner. There's a drain pipe. Let's see who has a picture. Just a gutter, guys. That's the nekuda here. A gutter doesn't go down vertically. A gutter is that the roofs were flat. There would be many pipes protruding outside the roof. the water that would fall on the roof would go out a little bit from one pipe, a little bit, and under all of these little pipes, there would be a long and elongated gutter. That's not this picture. Oh, very good. A gutter is the top picture here on the screen. It's common, see, by the fact that the gutter is not vertical, a gutter is not mamish horizontal. It's a little bit angled for the water to get out of it, but it was common for these maschilas, for these gutters to be very high up near the gag, and that's the nakud of our sugya. A tzinor, a drain pipe, which is the picture on the screen, the lower picture, drain pipe is the way it sounds. It's a pipe. It's vertical. It begins in the top, but it goes all the way down to the bottom. So the exit of the drain pipe is lower than 3 tfachim from the top of the gag. And we'll see why this is of significance. So first of all, just have that in mind. There's a maschila, there's a tzinor. Now there's another